Hello and a very warm welcome to this edition of Public Forum. I'm Shalini Verma. 63 years ago, India became a republic, breathing through the wounds of partition, extreme poverty, darkness caused by illiteracy and religious conflict almost drowned the fervor of freedom and idealism that had freed the country from the clutches of the British Empire. 2 generations later, this tragic turn of events in the nation's life is only a faint memory for most Indians. Today in Public Forum, we look back to find out how far we have travelled and the distance we have yet to cover. And we are joined by Vice Chancellor with OP Jindal University, Global University, Professor C. Kumar. Welcome to the program, all of you. Let's start the discussion. In the first segment, of course, we are going to talk about the building blocks of this republic on which really rests the story of Indian growth as to have we really got our basics in place or are there huge gaps to be filled? The socio-economic, political dynamics then was quite different. Poverty certainly defined India, but we were all equally poor. Today, the thing is that India, it has got great wealth and greater imbalances.
That's right.
Rich is getting more richer, poor is getting poorer. Why exactly do you think have we not been able to overcome these imbalances in the society?
Well, the story of Indian democracy is also about attempting to bridge these gaps. I think what my fellow panelists mentioned, the disparities of income and wealth are indeed writ large, and one of the efforts has been to, through more democracy and many other democratic decentralization and initiatives through that process, there has been attempts to bridge this gap. But what is, I would say, most inspiring in the Indian democracy is the effort to bridge this gap through what we as lawyers and also human rights lawyers would argue as a rights-based approach. So if you look at the contemporary discourse of last, say, couple of decades, and particularly the post-emergency Indian scenario, there has been a stronger and a sharper focus on the importance of constitutional rights and human rights to infuse into the governance structure. And in more recent times, if you look at the growth and development of economic and social rights, be it in relation to the right to information, but then again right to education, and then Narega, and a number of other schemes, including more recently the cash transfers, and of course the effort to increase the development of right to health, the entire focus has been to create a set of obligations on the part of the government and institutional mechanisms to deliver these rights to the people. And these, increasingly, these are not, pitched as some sort of benevolent, giveaways by the government of the day to the people. It is actually seen as legitimate entitlements of the people, and the people have a right and the government has a duty to respond to it. And that is drawn out of both the constitutional ethos and the successive legislative frameworks that have been institutionalized. Now this, in my view, is one of the most unique and remarkable outcomes of the strong democratic structures that were infused into the constitutional framework way back in 1940s.
Professor Rajkumar, how would you compare the young Indian Republic and the issues that were central to its polity then and now?
Well, so if you look at just after the idea of, after the Indian independence, one of the most extraordinary Indian stories, which I suppose the contemporary history has not given enough notice, is the reorganization of states. I mean, imagine over 500 princely states were extraordinarily negotiated to be brought into the Indian fabric. And the more you read about the set of negotiations that went through, led by, of course, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and many others, that in itself demonstrates the extraordinary possibility that India as a nation, as an idea, provides for. And these were people who had fundamentally, many of them were against the idea of being part of India. And to get them to sign the instrument of accession to India was in itself an extraordinary achievement. But then the point, which is, when you look at the way we have evolved as a republic, I think it also has to be given credit to the democratization process, that there has been a far greater inclusiveness to the idea of India. Of course, we have seen in the past some states attempting to seek some sort of secession from India, including the state of Tamil Nadu. But over the years, we've been able to strengthen the bond within the larger constitutional framework, and within that, there is a stronger sense of what is constitutionally referred to cooperative federalism, but states asserting their rights and wanting to get more out of the larger body politic. I think this in itself is an extraordinary, unraveling of the power of Indian democracy.
Okay.
Secondly, I would say that one of the most, inspiring contemporary initiatives is the entire process of infusing rights into the jurisprudence, but more critically, to what extent the Indian citizen is able to seek the accountability of the Indian state. Now, that is a whole set of contemporary issues, including the contemporary civil society movement to infuse accountability, issues relating to corruption, but more importantly, the kind of attempts that are being made today to seek a greater degree of transparency and accountability on all aspects of exercise of power. It is not just governmental power, including powers that are held by the corporations, companies. It's also the power that are held by other bodies. Now, the question is, one aspect which is unfortunately not yet seen effectively is the holding the politicians and the members of parliament and the MLAs accountable, the accountability moving beyond the electoral accountability. Because at present, what we are unfortunately content with is that we hold regularly elections, and I am personally very conscious that a society which is not able to infuse respect for the rule of law, elections and continuously conducted elections is not enough. An electoral democracy which does not have rule of law, which is the case India is, we will not be able to create a stronger and a vibrant democracy. You talked about pollution in water. I can talk about black money in land purchases.
Right.
To every aspect of our conduct in this country, to live a law-abiding citizen in this country is extremely difficult. It's not impossible. Difficult. And we have reached a stage where we don't even care to be conscious of the fact that how many laws we day in and day out violate, which are actually in the statute books, and we are expected to follow. And that's the biggest challenge that we have to face as a maturing democracy.
Okay. But, political stability, as you said, was, of course, the big concern when we were shifting from one party to the multi-party system. But more or less, as we now see, we have accepted coalitions. The Election Commission has announced 25th of January as the National Voters' Day. What does it really say about the rising faith over the power of ballot, the power of vote? How would you like to
It's extraordinary. That? I mean, if you look at the, I would say again, the farsightedness of the constitutional framers, when many parts of the world, even the developed world, were thinking about, who should be given the voting right. Universal adult franchise was part of the progressive thinking that emerged. Even within the Constituent Assembly debates, there were people who were looking at whether education should be made a criteria or whether other forms of criteria should be infused, and none of which was done. And so we had a universal adult franchise. And I think it made an important recognition of giving trust and making the Indian voter responsible for it. And it transcended other forms of social and economic and other prejudices that we have inherited and have continued since then. But I think the successive elections across the country have shown the wisdom of the Indian voter, trying to, whether it is rural or urban, whether it is different socioeconomic classes of people, they've been able to discriminate with regard to the political parties, their own contributions. And even so, I would even argue that how they've carefully discriminated the state and the central elections, and within a context, which party or which set of political groups can better protect and safeguard the interests at the national level and at the state level. Now, these are very important achievements, which for me, it is not only important achievements for India, but also there are good parts of the world, including Africa, other parts of South Asia, Latin America, Middle East, are also being inspired. And India is leading that effort from the south to what democratic credentials and the institutionalization of democracy through these processes are going to help. However, I must only caution that if you look at the state capture that is also prevailing in the kind of, successive scandals, as well as significantly institutionalized forms of corruption, are affecting the basic trust between the citizen and the state.
That's
and
right.
Now, if you look at the 1910 and 1920 America, there are strong parallels as to what was prevailing in the US at that time. But that changed over the years because US ended up creating independent democratic institutions which led the accountability framework. The question before India is, are we ready to do it? Are we ready to recognize that we are at a critical stage where almost all of our democratic institutions are suspect in some form? These challenges are going to be felt in the years to come.
That's right. Let's come to the corruption issue.
One point I will add on the environmentalism is the fact that these are not issues where reasonable people cannot disagree, meaning that countries around the world have debated and discussed, and unfortunately we in India don't have a sound public discourse on issues related to environment.
Just because globally climate
against. It is actually not about for or against. It's a much deeper problem where countries have to consciously, Europe has done it, US has done it, South Korea and China and other parts of Southeast Asia are grappling with it as we speak, and it is important that these issues are brought to the public domain in a much more sophisticated, rigorous, objective, analytical manner than if you're not with us, you're against us.
That's right.
That's right. But corruption was a big issue even then.
Yes.
But then there was just small financial bunglings. Now you have scams where not just worth crores or worth lakhs, while it's about lakhs and crores put together. How do you think, what do you exactly make out of the public outpour, let's say, on this particular issue of corruption?
Well, I have always maintained, and probably have written a book on it, which is about the relationship between corruption and human rights.
Right.
Unlike many other parts of the world, India, corruption is a human rights issue. Corruption systematically affects civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights of Indian people. And that is most, unfortunately reflected in one of our most recent issue relating to corruption in the recruitment of school teachers. And this issue came up just a few days back, and there has been a conviction. But around the same time, the ASAR report shows that you have a situation where 4th standard and 3rd standard students do not have the knowledge that they ought to have gained in 1st standard. You have a corrupt system which recruits teachers through paying bribe, and you end up creating a society with schools and colleges with untrained, unqualified teachers who are not able to impact education. We can talk the similar situation in our hospitals. We can talk about our quality of our roads. We can talk about quality of our buildings. We can pretty much talk about everything that affects the people of India. So the real trouble now is the Indian problem of corruption cannot be dealt with a stronger criminal legislation. We just cannot have stronger anti-corruption act and expect things to change. We really need to move in towards empowerment of people. We need to create systems and frameworks which focuses on the transparency of entire institutional process. Why is the right to information, by even its harshest critics, rated as one of the most revolutionary legislation? It pretty much, empowered the citizenry and made the entire process of functioning of the government open to the public domain. And systematically, there has been a backlash through both the bureaucracy as well as the political establishment to undermine, reduce the scope of the act, create more and more exceptions, and every such attempt has been thwarted by the civil society response. So we need to be vigilant about it. We also need to create very soon an institutional machinery. Unfortunately, we do not have it. I am saddened by the debate relating to the Lokpal, and there has been in many ways a consensus probably among most of the political parties not to move towards creating an independent institutional mechanism to fight corruption. We do not have a whistleblower protection law. We really need to urgently bring a whistleblower protection law. The attacks and the deaths of RTI activists across the country is a major source of concern. It only reflects the need for these measures to be put in place to seriously fight corruption.
That's right. To begin with you, Professor Rajkumar, how do you look at our huge claim of gender equality?
Well, absolutely, it has been an embarrassment, and unfortunately, we began to believe for a long time that recognition of substantive equality, both within the Constitution as well as the legislative framework, would help us achieve a greater egalitarianism within the society. Unfortunately, the over 60 years of Indian democracy has reflected the fact that this continues to be one of India's shame in many ways. And the problem is much deeper because the disparities are so huge. We have extremely archaic practices deeply embedded into social norms and cultural traditions of many parts of India which have not been challenged. Secondly, we also expect a lot to be achieved through law. I mean, frankly speaking, as a lawyer, I'm very conscious of the fact that laws and instruments through law as well as courts may not be the only way by which we need to and we can effectively achieve equality. We really need to transcend this process and infuse this into the popular imagination and to constantly bring it to the families and to the homes and to every aspect of our life. In fact, we need to bring this into universities, into institutions, so that every aspect of the entire political, civic and social life of a nation is conscious of the fact that gender equality should be the framework on the basis of which we have to govern as a society. We also need to be deeply troubled by the fact that whenever such things happen, the response by a number of serious people, both within the government and outside, is to blame it on the fact that, yes, the women probably should not go out in the night. They probably have to wear a different type of clothing, which will, ensure that these things don't happen. These kind of, attitudinal mindset that has been deeply ingrained in the popular imagination of a lot of our men as well as others is also a cause of our inability to seek change. We need to radically seek social transformation, and it is fine that that can be championed through the kind of advocacy efforts that was seen, unfortunately, after the tragic incident. But I can tell you that these tragic incidents have happened before, and momentary reflection of these tragic incidents only show that this momentum that gets built after the tragedy doesn't last long. And it's important that we keep it within the consciousness of it, and media has a very important role to play. We need to involve the courts, but we need to have legislation. But I'm very conscious that law and courts will not only solve the problem.
That's right.
Yes, the criminal justice system has to respond. There has to be a fast-track trial process, but ultimately it will depend upon how effectively we are able to change the mindset of most of us.
That's right. So along with the issue of health and sanity, there are issues of, the big rural-urban divide that we face in our country. Earlier we used to say India lived in its villages. Today India lives in its slums, and probably that's where lies one of the big questions as to what are we really going to do to divide this gap, to make sure that this rapid movement of people from the rural centers to the urban centers doesn't happen, and so we also deal with the problem of urban mess, the urban congestion.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the issue of migration of people from rural parts of India to urban is a very critical issue, and one of the most important reasons why they do it is seeking of opportunities, including education and employment. One of the important things which we have not done so far, and if you look at other developing countries, a lot of effort has been pretty much to create significant educational infrastructure. We need a lot more universities, we need a lot more schools and colleges, we need to increase the gross enrollment ratio so that at present, we have a gross enrollment ratio of 15%, which means 85% of Indians who are aspiring to be part of the higher education and are eligible to be part of the higher education do not have an opportunity, and good part of that will come from rural India. We do not have opportunities for community colleges. Vocational training has been significantly neglected. In that process, we have a situation where we have, untrained and ill-skilled barbers, electricians, plumbers, construction workers, and pretty much anything. So ultimately, we need to figure out how we are going to create a human development framework which focuses on education and through that process, empowerment. And that's a critical area which I believe will also bridge the gap between the rural and the urban India.
Okay, so in one last question to all of you, if I ask you to define the state of republic in one line, what would you say? Professor Rajkumar.
I am very optimistic about the youth of India. I strongly believe that this is one big segment which has not been adequately given attention to. The power of youth is not only immediately witnessed in different forums, but also the ability to seek entrepreneurship opportunities and to involve in the larger process of nation building is yet to be achieved and explored, but the next century is going to see that more significantly.
Okay, so on that note, it's time here to thank all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us.